Turns out that doing loose cannons on real people and events is, kind of a bummer. You know, because the world is sad. Speaking of which, let's talk about Marilyn Monroe.
A kiss on the hand may be quite continental, but...
Glamour icon, tragic cautionary tale, attributed quoter of shitty Facebook memes that there is absolutely no evidence that Marilyn ever said that. People stop spreading this. God damn it, no. No, stop it. This is a made-up quote. Stop attributing it to Marilyn Monroe. But it is pretty telling. People are more interested in the idea of Marilyn Monroe than in the person that she actually was. A construct, if you will, that people make up to be more relatable. That's why when I think of Marilyn Monroe, one of the first things that comes to my mind is Andy Warhol's painting, which is called Marilyn Diptych. Because really, there are two Marilyns, the actual human being who lived and died tragically, and Marilyn Monroe, the glamorous symbol of Hollywood glitz and glamour, who is just that, a symbol, a construct. The reason Warhol's work comes to mind for me is because Marilyn's face was the image that he set on as the idea of pop culture ubiquity, and some people interpret this to mean that repetition and ubiquity render an image meaningless. He also famously did the same thing with Campbell's soup cans, Coke bottles, Elvis. This therefore being his critique/tribute to pop culture through pop art. So in a perverse way, that's what made Warhol's interpretation become such a perfect statement of what pop culture even was. This human person's face has become so ubiquitous that it's just an image. It has all to do with the actual human being who owned it. In terms of symbology, aside from the image Warhol made famous, her two most famous images come from the Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend scene from Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, famously reappropriated by Madonna, and the sewer grate scene from The 7-Year Itch, parodied by everyone.
Cut!
Repetition ad nauseum, yes, but to what end? She means something to people, but what? Marilyn gets name dropped in pop songs a lot. But the most famous pop tribute to her is Candle in the Wind.
Seems to me you live your life like a candle in the wind.
And this one kind of sets that tone of trying to separate the symbol that was Marilyn Monroe from the person who was Norma Jean Mortensen or Baker or... So I find that pop culture depictions of Marilyn Monroe tend to want to reconcile this dichotomy, this split between the icon of Hollywood glitz and glamour and a troubled young woman who never really learned to connect with anybody, in no small part because nobody ever really learned to connect with her. The song lyric was adapted into a low-budget movie called Goodbye Norma Jean.
Prove it! Prove what he said! You owe me that!
It holds a yikes rating on IMDb, and there are a surprising number of low-budget Marilyn biopics. There's also a few about her relationship with the Kennedys and how her death was like a false flag or something, and there's all sorts of like some truther nonsense. Yes, there are Marilyn truthers, shock, I know, but we're not going to get into that. So, before the 90s it was mostly biopic stuff, but then VHS became big, and with it, direct-to-video schlock. My favorite of this group is a film called Marilyn Alive and Behind Bars, which is exactly what it sounds like.
I'm Marilyn Monroe.
I thought she died.
That's a lie.
It took place in the present day of 1992 when Marilyn was in her 60s or so, but still looking good. Basically, her death was faked by the studio to commit insurance fraud, but they kept her alive for some reason. And also there are mind control scientists.
They insured my life for millions of dollars, and then they murdered a lookalike Marilyn Monroe and left her in my bedroom.
Did you ever think that maybe there's more to life than being really, really, really ridiculously good looking?
She also looks the same as she does in her publicity stills of old, because I guess Marilyn went to all this effort for 30 years every day without changing a thing. You know, getting a haircut, and the mad mind control scientists even gave her hair bleach. Nice. There was another one of these called Netherworld, and that featured a zombie Marilyn.
First I was alive, and then I was dead. And now I'm alive again.
Classy. There was one woman in the 90s named Susan Griffiths who seems to have built an entire career out of being a professional Marilyn Monroe impersonator, and she pops up a lot. She first appears in a 1991 made-for-TV movie called Marilyn and Me, which is basically a precursor to My Week with Marilyn. She pops up again in an episode of Quantum Leap, where Sam quantum leaps into Marilyn Monroe's chauffeur right before she dies. The premise of this show is protagonist Sam quantum leaps into different people's lives/bodies to do destiny things, and he's a nice guy who wants to help, so it's sad that she's destined to die young and tragic, but hey, at least he puts it off by a couple months.
Are you telling me that I saved her life so she could be in one last picture? But what a picture.
You know what? No comment. Here Griffiths is again as a Marilyn impersonator in Pulp Fiction, and yet again in the short-lived TV series Time Cop.
Actually, I was hoping to get a little advice from you.
Which I didn't know existed either. Harmony Korine made a 2007 film called Mr. Lonely that takes place in a commune of celebrity impersonators. These guys have no real identity outside of who they're impersonating, so in this film she's just Marilyn. And Marilyn has a bit of a love triangle with Charlie Chaplin and Michael Jackson, and eventually hangs herself. Harmony Korine. Yeah, I have zero thoughtful insight into this filmmaker. If you want that, you should go watch the Brows Held High episode.
I'll be playing Grushenka.
Can you spell that?
Sure. Can you?
My Week with Marilyn is the highest profile of the recent adaptations, and it's aight. Michelle Williams is great, despite Eddie Redmayne's performance that frankly made me think we'd never see this guy again. This one documents the tense production of The Prince and the Showgirl, which was a real movie directed by Laurence Olivier during her time while she was married to playwright Arthur Miller, who wrote The Crucible. God, she had a weird life. Anyway, it was based on 2 books by Colin Clark, who was played by Redmayne in this film, and which may or may not be accurate, we'll never know.
When you sing happy birthday to someone you love, or see diamonds you wish were all free.
The same year, there was a short-lived NBC drama called Smash, in which a Broadway musical based on the life of Marilyn Monroe is produced, riding that Glee wave for adults, I guess. This show was more about intercast drama than about Marilyn, but Angelica Houston was in it. There's a 2012 feature in the vein of Movie 42 called Inappropriate Comedy, and here she's played by Lindsay Lohan. Lindsay Lohan plays a Marilyn-alike in an app where the viewer gets to look up her skirt. And that's the app. That is inappropriate. See, it's called Inappropriate Comedy because it's an app and it's inappropriate. Burn everything. Lana Del Rey did a Kanye-style short film out of her album Born to Die called Tropico that features her and that albino model dude I see on Tumblr sometimes as Adam and Eve, John Wayne as God, and Marilyn Monroe and Elvis as...
Marilyn's my mother, Jesus is my bestest friend.
Kinda ties back to that Marilyn the Spirit Guide thing. Lana Del Rey loves to romanticize and appropriate that drugged-out starlet persona, so okay. And I find this interesting because when you look at the likes of Lana Del Rey and Megan Fox and how they kind of want to emulate her, I mean, it makes sense. And I know Lana Del Rey is pretty out there, but I think she does kind of hit on something with the way that we deify our pop culture icons. Monroe's image was recently acquired and is now managed by Authentic Brands Group, a business which specializes in owning and managing dead celebrities. So now this image of Marilyn Monroe that has become almost folkloric is now a company's intellectual property. And that's how she's come to be codified in post-Marilyn interpretations. Marilyn is the symbol, a symbol of dying young, a symbol of Hollywood glamour, a cautionary tale, whatever, and Norma Jean is the person. And there's almost this sense of nascent guilt, the way she was objectified and dehumanized in life, ultimately leading to her death. Not that that necessarily redefined the way we relate to celebrities. The idea of her is relatable, but it's still kind of a brand, hence her being misquoted so much. Which is kind of funny because I think the real Marilyn would take umbrage with that. Here is a real quote. If I'm going to have that kind of influence, I want to be sure it's because of something I've actually said or written. So Marilyn has all this influence now as like an image macro and a soundbite, but most of it isn't really hers. Sadly poetic. Speaking of sad, I promise I will have the next episode out soon. Thank you all to the patrons who make this show possible, and also to my researcher / AE, Elisa Hansen. You can vote for the next episode in the link below, and I will see you next time. Soon, I promise.
What's 5,000 times better than a candle in the wind?
This song is called 5,000 Candles in the Wind.